Hey yo guys, what's up and welcome back to Two Toe Tags Metal Reviews, and today we're getting our first impressions of the brand new album from Testament titled Titans of Creation. Alright guys, Testament, behemoth of a band. This is their 13th album. These guys have had a career spanning decades, but unfortunately neither of us have really dove into this band. I've listened to this band several times. I've put on albums here and there. I've seen them live a handful of times, but I just never really got into them to the point where I really call myself a fan. I'm hoping that changes.
Yeah, and we checked out one of the music videos for the album, and it sounded really cool. So, yeah, I think it's gonna sound pretty good.
Yeah, so we're gonna listen to it for the first time in its entirety, and we'll be back in just a sec to give you guys our first impressions, so stay put. Alright guys, we're back. We just listened to Titans of Creation in its entirety. TV Fish, what did you think?
I thought that this album was pretty cool.
Pretty cool?
And it's, you know, classic thrash metal, but first of all, one thing I really love about all these old thrash metal bands making albums now is that the quality is so much higher. Because if you listen to some of the really old stuff from like the 80s, the mix is not really the best. The songs are cool, but it doesn't, you know, kind of really appeal to the ears as much. But nowadays, like the mix and the mastering is just so nice. Everything sounds just beautiful, and that's one thing I really appreciate with this album. And I think that's there's a perfect example of that in track number 2, titled World War III. I wrote in my notes, it's a really classic feel, but it's got a modern edge, and I love that. And I love that a lot of thrash metal bands are giving that vibe as well with their albums. Totally cool. I thought the chorus was sick. I thought the solo was neat. The solos on this album, I feel, are really similar to each other. Some of them stand out more than others. Overall, there is a general good quality to them. I don't think any of these solos on this album are bad per se. But that being said, with this album, I felt there was a section near the end where things started to slip a little bit for me, and it came to a head at track number 8, which is titled False Prophet. And it just felt like that song didn't bring anything new to the table. Nothing of it was really that interesting to me.
I'm gonna stop you for a second because you said something about solos, so I put a little, I wanted to mention something. Now you're talking about the song I was gonna mention. I want to throw this in there. He's right when he says the solos all kind of felt the same. Again, this is a first listen only, right? We gotta dive a little deeper into it throughout the week. But with that song specifically, I felt like the solo stood out the most in that song because of the way it was. It was weird. It was broken up, right? You heard like there's like a little solo section, and it kept getting broken up by this rhythm portion, right?
It got like cut off.
It did like solo, then it did this rhythm groove for like a bar, then it solo, then rhythm groove for a bar. And it kept going back and forth. Then finally the solo kind of takes over and kicks in for a few bars and does its thing. I made a note of that because I thought that was unique. So I find it's very odd that you're talking about the album, you know, having issues, and you're pointing to that song first as an example.
I mean, you know, I did write that the riff in the solo section in that song is really cool, but overall it didn't really do much for me. Now, in terms of soloing, one of my favorites came from track number 10, which is Code of Hammurabi. That solo felt a lot more unique than the other solos, and I think it's because it didn't start with blistering speed, crazy stuff. It built itself up to that. It had dual guitars going on. It kind of did a little bit of world building before it actually got to the meat and potatoes of the solo, which I thought was really cool. I love that. One thing I really love about this album is when it shines, it's the bass. And that song is actually a really good example of that. The bass lines sound really cool. And there's a few songs on this album that have some highlights of the bass, and I really love that. And that includes Ishtar's Gate, which is track number 6.
Yeah.
And there was another one. Oh, which one was it? Track number 5, City of Angels. Now, one thing I thought was really interesting that kind of got me thinking is about the last track, which is called Catacombs. It's, you know, kind of its own little like outro track, but it made me think, with the sound of that song, what if this is one of those albums that was intended to work forwards, but also backwards?
Yeah, you mentioned that. I personally don't think so. I think that's just the outro track. Could it be an intro track? Sure. Could you listen to this album backwards? Probably. but I don't think that that was like an actual intention from the artist.
I mean, it's certainly a thing that bands have done.
Yeah.
But, and part of my reasoning is that this song like builds up a lot, right? And then you have Curse of Osiris, which is the song right before it, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album, by the way. That song is nasty. It has a black metal-esque chorus, which sounds totally cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome song. And if you think about it, after an intro track, hearing something like that makes sense. Something just totally crazy and in your face.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's definitely a cool theory. Curse of Osiris is definitely my favorite track on the album so far. The riff is awesome. The tempo's great. You mentioned it's got this black metal style chorus to it, like a harsh vocal and blast beat, which is really cool. Speaking of the vocals, Chuck sounds pretty good on this album. He sounds just as good as he's ever sounded from what I've heard of his stuff and what I'm remembering. He's not my favorite vocalist by any means, but he's
gets the job done.
He gets the job done, yeah, he does. And he's not one of those vocalists that's just really boring. He's got some range, he's got some dynamics, which really, really helps this band. But overall, I feel like this is a band and this is an album that they really just play it to the books a little bit too much for me, right? It's almost like...
Pretty straightforward album.
It's very straightforward, it's very by the numbers. There's not much in the way of, different guitar tones. There's not much in the way of experimentation. You mentioned the bass. Let's talk about the bass for a second. So there's a couple highlight bass moments, like the beginning of Ishtar's Gate. And I found that the bass throughout the whole album was very kind of chunky sounding. Just very, you can definitely feel it and hear it. But what I also found was that I felt like I was listening to the same two notes over and over again. I am probably wrong, but that's what my ear was picking up. Just the same 2 or 3 notes over and over again, minus a few parts here and there where the bass kind of, was highlighted a little more. Other than that, throughout the rest of the choruses and verses and groups and stuff like that, it felt like the same chunky 2 or 3 notes playing in the background. Not a bad thing, but it started to get to the point where I was like, am I just gonna keep hearing that over and over again in the back? I don't know.
Also consider the fact that you've only heard this one time.
That's very true.
So, just like, based on that listening session, maybe your ear got a little bit burned out from it, whatever, but like as you listen, you'll be able to look through it more specifically and just focus on the bass, and maybe you'll hear a lot more than what you thought you heard today.
That's true, and you know what, I'm gonna pay attention to stuff like that when we listen to the album for the entire week. Before we sign off, I just want to throw a quick nod to a couple more notable songs that I thought were, their standout tracks, which is number 2, World War III, which you did talk about briefly. Number 4, Night of the Witch, actually was a really cool track as well. Some great riffs. The vocal dynamics in that song were really cool. Different styles and things like that. So there's a few songs here that definitely stood out to me. But there's a bunch of songs that kind of felt like they were just very run-of-the-mill, and I'm hoping that these are the types of songs that will start jumping out at me through the week as we listen to this album more and more. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna listen to the album as much as we possibly can throughout the week, and we'll be back in a week's time to give you guys our full and final review of Titans of Creation. So that's it for this video, guys. Comment down below, let us know what you guys think of this album. If you guys liked it, if you guys are fans of Testament, sound off. Right down there. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. Check out our Spotify playlist linked in the description. I'm Vile Self.
I'm TV Fish.
We'll see you guys in the next one. Keep those heads banging.